The steady beeping of the heart monitor was a small comfort as I lay in the hospital bed, trying to rest after the ordeal that had landed me here in the first place. The sterile white walls, the soft rustling of nurses moving past my room, and the gentle hum of the machines created an odd kind of calm. My body was weak, and every movement reminded me that I was still in a precarious state. The doctor had told me I needed at least a few days of uninterrupted rest, so when the door burst open with an ear-splitting screech, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. A woman, mid-40s, platinum blonde with an aggressive pixie cut, stomped in like she owned the place. Behind her, 2 kids, no older than 7, barreled into my room, one shrieking as he brandished what looked like a plastic sword, the other climbing onto the empty chair beside my bed. My confusion quickly turned to alarm as the woman, her over-the-top designer bag slung across her shoulder, planted herself at the foot of my bed, eyeing my medical equipment with a look I couldn't quite place. "Oh, wow," she said, her voice sickly sweet but laced with something predatory. "My kids would love this." Before I could even ask what she was talking about, her perfectly manicured finger jabbed toward the heart monitor, its soft beeping oblivious to the brewing storm in the room. I blinked at her, trying to process her words. "Excuse me?" I croaked, my throat dry from the oxygen I'd been given earlier. She barely acknowledged me, instead turning to her son, who had already started tugging on the wires at the side of the machine. "Look, sweetie, isn't this cool? It makes all these fun noises." I instinctively reached out, weakly grabbing at the wires to keep them in place. "Ma'am, that's my heart monitor," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even despite the rising panic in my chest. "It's keeping track of my condition." She let out a laugh, high-pitched, condescending. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. It's just a toy. I mean, look at it. Lights, buttons. It's obviously some kind of plaything. Hospitals always have these lying around, don't they?" I stared at her in disbelief. This had to be a joke. No one could seriously believe a heart monitor, something essential to a patient's well-being, was a mere toy. But before I could say another word, her daughter had already started pressing the buttons, giggling as the machine let out an error beep. My pulse spiked. "Stop! You can't touch that." I tried to sit up, but the sudden movement made my head swim. The woman huffed, placing her hands on her hips as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Oh, relax," she said. "I'll just unplug it real quick, so my kids can take turns playing with it." The blood drained from my face. "No, that's dangerous. I need that." But she wasn't listening. Her hand reached out, fingers curling around the cords leading to my chest, and yanked them just enough to make the monitor flicker. Instantly, my vision blurred, my chest tightening as my heart struggled to keep up with the sudden interference. A warning alarm blared from the machine, but instead of stopping, she laughed. "See? It makes even more noises now. My kids are going to love this." I gasped for breath, trying desperately to reach the call button at my bedside. My limbs felt sluggish, my body struggling to keep up with the chaos unfolding around me. The woman's son was now yanking on the 4-line in my arm, while her daughter had moved on to the oxygen monitor clipped to my finger. Panic surged through me as I managed to hit the call button, my strength barely enough to push it. "Nurse," I rasped, but the woman just scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she snapped. "It's not like you're dying." The irony of her words would have been laughable if I wasn't literally fighting to keep my heart rate steady. The monitor beeped wildly, my oxygen levels dipping, but she was too busy trying to yank it free from the stand. The door burst open again, this time with an actual nurse storming inside. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her eyes instantly scanning the situation. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The woman spun around, an indignant scowl on her face. "Finally, someone with authority," she shrieked. "This man is hogging the hospital's equipment, and my kids just want to play with it for a little while." He's being completely unreasonable. The nurse's face twisted in sheer disbelief. "Ma'am, that equipment is saving his life," she snapped. She rushed to my side, checking the monitor as she quickly assessed the damage. The woman, however, was undeterred. "Oh, please. You people act like these things are so rare. Don't you have extras?" The nurse looked absolutely livid, her hands already moving to adjust my wires, ensuring they were secure. "This is a medical device, not a toy," she said, her tone sharp with authority. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security." For the first time, the woman's bravado faltered. "Security? Oh, don't be ridiculous," she scoffed, though her voice lacked the same confidence. "I'm just trying to get what's fair. It's not my fault this hospital is hoarding all the good stuff." My breath came in ragged gasps as the nurse fixed my oxygen levels, but I managed to find enough strength to glare at her. "Get out," I rasped. "Now?" She narrowed her eyes at me like I had just personally insulted her entire bloodline. But before she could argue further, 2 more hospital staff members arrived, their expressions stone cold. "Ma'am, you need to leave immediately," one of them said firmly, her lips pressed into a thin line, her kids still obliviously tugging on the 4-pole. "Ugh, this is so unfair," she shrieked, grabbing her children by the arms and dragging them toward the door. "You people are all so greedy." With one final huff, she stormed out, her kids wailing behind her. The moment she was gone, I collapsed against my pillow, my body weak with exhaustion. The nurse was already adjusting my wires, her movements efficient but gentle. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. I think she almost killed me." The nurse's lips pressed into a thin line, anger flickering in her eyes. "We're filing an incident report," she said. "That woman should never have been allowed in here." I closed my eyes, the reality of what just happened sinking in. And yet, something told me that wasn't the last I'd see of her. Not by a long shot. The peace in my hospital room barely lasted an hour before the nightmare returned. I had finally stabilized after the last encounter, my heart monitors beeping back to its usual rhythm, and the nurses had reassured me that security would be keeping an eye on the halls. But I should have known better. People like her don't just leave. They fester, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The first warning came when I heard loud, indignant voices arguing just outside my door. "I already told you, this is ridiculous." That voice, shrill, grating, dripping with entitlement, sent a shiver of dread through me. Karen was back. "I don't care about your rules. He doesn't even need all that stuff. You think he's the only person in this hospital? My kids have just as much right to use it as he does." My heart rate spiked, and the monitor beeped in protest as adrenaline surged through me. No. She's not coming back in here. But before I could even press the call button for help, the door slammed open with a force that made the hinges groan. There she was, backlit by the fluorescent hallway lights, her face twisted in fury. Behind her, a frazzled-looking nurse and a security guard were in a heated argument, trying to block her entry. "Ma'am, we've already explained that you are not allowed to be in here," the security guard said, his patience visibly thinning. "If you don't leave, we will escort you out." Karen scoffed, flipping her over-processed hair over her shoulder. "Oh, please. What are you going to do? Arrest me for wanting my kids to have a little fun? This is public property, isn't it? And that machine right there," she jabbed a perfectly manicured finger toward my heart monitor, "is being wasted on him when my son could be playing with it instead." I struggled to push myself up in bed, my hands shaking from both fear and disbelief. "This isn't a game, you lunatic," I snapped, my voice hoarse but filled with raw panic. "This is keeping me alive." She narrowed her eyes at me like I had just told her the sky wasn't blue. "Oh, get over yourself," she spat. "You're obviously fine. Just look at you, talking moving, breathing. You're not dying. But my kids are bored out of their minds because you're hiding all the cool stuff. I gaped at her, unable to comprehend how someone could be so utterly devoid of empathy. But before I could even formulate a response, she lunged for the machine. "Stop!" the nurse shouted, but it was too late. Karen grabbed a fistful of wires and ripped them free. The moment the connection severed, my body betrayed me. A searing pain shot through my chest as the monitor let out a wailing alarm, the flatline beep ringing in my ears. It felt like a vice had clamped around my ribcage, my lungs struggling to pull in air. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, black spots dancing in front of my eyes as my body spiraled into shock. The world tilted, the sounds around me muffled, but I could still hear Karen laughing. "Oh, come on. He's faking it," she scoffed, shaking the now-dead monitor as if trying to prove her point. "It's just beeping. That doesn't mean anything. God, hospitals are such a scam." The security guard sprang into action, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her away from the bed. "That's enough," he barked, his voice thunderous with authority. "Ma'am, you just tampered with life-supporting equipment. You are under arrest for endangering a patient's life." Karen's expression twisted in outrage, her voice hitting an ear-piercing pitch. "Excuse me," she shrieked. "You can't arrest me. I didn't even do anything. He's fine. Look, he's—" She turned toward me as if expecting me to back her up, but what she saw must have finally shaken her delusions, because I was anything but fine. My body convulsed in the bed, my chest heaving as I desperately tried to suck in air that wouldn't come. The nurse had already shoved the call button for an emergency response, her hands flying to stabilize me as she shouted for assistance. "Code blue! Code blue!" The room exploded into chaos. Within seconds, a team of doctors and nurses stormed in, pushing Karen and her screaming children out of the way as they rushed to save me. My body felt like it was shutting down, the edges of my vision darkening, but I could still hear the scuffle as Karen fought against the security guard trying to detain her. "This is insane. I didn't do anything wrong," she wailed as she kicked and flailed, her voice barely registering through the haze of my impending unconsciousness. "This is discrimination, just because I'm a good mother who wants her kids to have the best. You can't do this to me." The last thing I saw before my vision completely failed was Karen being slammed against the wall, handcuffs snapping around her wrists as she screamed bloody murder. Then everything went dark. When I finally came to, the world was softer, blurred around the edges. My chest felt like it had been crushed under a boulder, but the familiar beeping of the heart monitor, mercifully reconnected, was the first thing I noticed. It was back. I was alive. A nurse hovered nearby, her face lined with exhaustion, but relieved when she saw my eyes flutter open. "You're okay," she said gently, adjusting my four. "We stabilized you just in time." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. "Karen," I croaked, the name tasting like poison in my mouth. The nurse's lips pressed into a thin line. "She's in police custody," she said. Security had to drag her out of here. She was still screaming about how unfair it was when they took her away. She let out a long breath, shaking her head in disbelief. "Honestly, I've never seen anything like it. She really thought she was entitled to your medical equipment." I exhaled, my chest aching with the movement, but I forced out a weak chuckle. "That's a whole new level of crazy." The nurse nodded. "You don't have to worry about her anymore. The hospital's pressing charges, and you should, too." I closed my eyes, the reality of everything sinking in. She had almost killed me, all because she thought my heart monitor was a toy. I had heard stories of insane Karens before, but I had never imagined I would live through one. Or, more accurately, barely survive one. Waking up after nearly dying wasn't something I ever thought I'd experience, but as the fog of unconsciousness lifted, I found myself in a world that still felt unreal. The beeping of the heart monitor was back. Thank God. but my chest ached with a dull, persistent pain that reminded me of just how close I had come to slipping away. The hospital room was quiet now, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded hours before. But the damage, both physical and emotional, was already done. A nurse entered, her expression soft but lined with concern as she checked my vitals. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice gentle, like she was afraid I might break apart if she spoke too loudly. I swallowed, my throat still dry, but at least I could breathe again. Like I got run over by a freight train, I admitted hoarsely. "Is she gone?" The nurse's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes." Security removed her from the premises, and the police took her into custody shortly after. She put up a fight, started screaming about how she was a real victim here. She even tried to say we were the ones assaulting her. She shook her head in disbelief. "But don't worry. She's facing some serious charges. The hospital is filing a case against her for endangering a patient's life, and they've encouraged you to press charges as well." I blinked, trying to process the words. The last few hours had been a blur of terror and adrenaline, but now, as the reality of it all settled in, anger burned beneath my skin. That woman, that entitled, selfish lunatic, had nearly killed me over a heart monitor she thought was a toy. And yet, even as she was dragged out, she was still playing the victim, convinced she had done nothing wrong. "Good," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. "She deserves whatever's coming to her." The nurse nodded. "She does. The doctors will be in soon to discuss your condition, but I wanted to let you know that we've had a lot of patients and staff coming forward to share their experiences. Apparently, you weren't the first person she harassed today." My eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "She was causing trouble all over the hospital," the nurse explained. "Before she even made it to your room, she was demanding a private waiting area because she didn't want her kids around sick people. She screamed at a receptionist for not giving her free snacks. She even tried to walk into the maternity ward because she thought they had better toys for her kids to play with." I exhaled sharply, feeling a mix of frustration and exhaustion settle over me. Of course, she had been a nightmare before she even got to me. It made sense. People like her didn't just wake up and decide to be monsters. They lived like that, walking through life believing the world owed them whatever they wanted. Before I could respond, there was a soft knock at the door, and a doctor stepped inside. He looked relieved to see me awake, but his face was serious. "Mr. Carter, how are you feeling?" I let out a slow breath. "Alive. Barely." The doctor nodded. "That's understandable. You went into cardiac distress when the monitor was removed so abruptly. The lack of immediate monitoring caused a dangerous fluctuation in your heart rate, and you suffered a brief loss of oxygen. It was touch and go for a moment." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing against me. I knew it had been bad. I had felt my body shutting down, but hearing it confirmed sent a fresh wave of unease through me. The doctor continued, his expression carefully neutral. "We're going to keep you under observation for the next few days. Your heart needs time to stabilize, and we want to make sure there are no lasting complications from the oxygen deprivation." I nodded slowly, though I felt a prickle of anxiety at the idea of staying here any longer. But I knew there was no choice. I had already been close to death once. I wasn't about to take another risk. The doctor glanced at his clipboard before looking back at me. "I also want to let you know that the hospital's legal team is involved now. The woman who attacked you, Karen Miller, has a history of disruptive behavior. We've been made aware of at least 3 other incidents in different hospitals where she harassed staff and patients, though none as severe as this." My jaw clenched. "She's done this before?" The doctor nodded grimly. "Not to this extent, but yes. She's been banned from 2 other hospitals in the state. We're working with law enforcement to ensure she's held accountable." The anger inside me flared again, but this time it was mixed with something colder, determination. This woman had been getting away with this for years, terrorizing people without facing any real consequences. But this time, she had gone too far. This time, She had almost killed someone. Me. I clenched my fists. I want to press charges. The doctor didn't look surprised. Good. You should. The rest of the day passed in a haze of medical tests and police interviews. The officers who came to take my statement were professional, but clearly appalled by what had happened. We've got the security footage. One of them assured me. It's all there. Her storming in, her ripping out the monitor, her fighting security while you were literally coding in the background. There's no way she's talking her way out of this. That was a small comfort, at least. But still, as the hours stretched on and night fell, I found myself staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the events of the day from my mind. She had walked into my hospital room like she owned the place. She had laughed while I struggled to breathe. She had fought against being removed, as if she had been the one wronged. And the worst part, she still probably thought she had done nothing wrong. I didn't know what her sentence would be. I didn't know if she learned anything from it. But I knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't be able to do this again. Not if I had anything to say about it. A few days later, I was discharged from the hospital. My recovery would take time, but at least I was alive. As I left, one of the nurses who had been with me through the ordeal stopped me at the door. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly, "and you're going to be okay." I gave her a small, tired smile. Thanks. And as I stepped out into the fresh air, leaving the nightmare behind, I made myself a promise. No matter what happened next, I wouldn't let her define my story. She had taken enough, and she wasn't going to take anything else.